A quiet question about space. Have you ever felt tired not because you did too much, but because you had no room to breathe, no space to be quiet, no space to be yourself, no space to make mistakes while learning something new like English? In this video, I want to tell you a slow, real story from my own life in the United States, about climate, culture, love, marriage, family, and one simple question that kept following me for 2 weeks. Why do Americans need so much space? And do you know how to protect yourself when everything feels too close? You might be watching this while feeling stuck with English. You listen, but the words pass too fast. You read, but your mind drifts away. You try to speak, but your voice freezes inside your chest. It feels like your brain is full, your heart is tired, and yet people keep telling you to try harder. What no one tells you is this: sometimes the real problem is not effort. It is the lack of space. 2 weeks ago, here in the US, I noticed something small but powerful. People did not rush into conversations. They left pauses. They stood a little farther away. They did not explain everything. At first, it felt cold. Then it felt strange. And slowly, it felt peaceful. Let me ask you something gently. When you learn English, do you give yourself space to be slow? Or do you pressure yourself the way you were pressured before? By deadlines, expectations, or fear of being judged? Your brain, just like your heart, needs room. Neuroscience shows that learning happens better when the nervous system feels safe, not crowded. When you feel watched or rushed, your brain switches to protection mode. It stops absorbing. It stops playing. It stops learning. Americans understand this instinctively, even if they never explain it. They grow up in a culture shaped by large land, wide roads, big skies, and strong seasons. Climate matters more than we think. In many parts of the US, weather changes fast. One day is bright and open. The next is cold and silent. People learn early to turn inward, to respect distance, to recharge alone. Space is not rejection. Space is survival. In my first days here, I misread this completely. Silence felt like distance. Distance felt like indifference. I thought, why don't they ask more questions? Why don't they check on me? But then I realized something uncomfortable. They were not ignoring me. They were trusting me. Trusting that I could speak when ready. Trusting that I could protect my own boundaries. Psychology calls this emotional autonomy. It means each person is responsible for their inner world. No one invades it without permission. No one fills it with noise unless invited. For someone learning English, or learning to love again, this can feel terrifying. Because when no one pushes you, you must face yourself. Here is the strange truth. Motivation does not grow in pressure. It grows in permission. When you give yourself permission to pause, your mind opens. When you allow silence, your thoughts organize themselves. Studies on language acquisition show that spaced learning, short, calm exposure over time, builds stronger memory than forced repetition. Your brain is not lazy. It is careful. I remember standing in a quiet American kitchen one evening, the heater humming softly, no one talking. In that silence, English words came back to me, not from effort but from memory. Simple words. Real words. Words connected to life. Cold. Warm. Home. Space. This is why this story begins with a question, not an answer. Because Americans often begin relationships this way too. They do not rush intimacy. They observe. They wait. They give space, and in that space, truth shows itself. If you are exhausted from learning English, maybe you are not failing. Maybe you are overcrowded. Too many rules. Too many voices telling you how you should sound. What if, instead, you learned the way Americans live, slowly, with distance, with respect for your own limits? In the next parts of this story, I will share how this idea of space affected my love, my marriage, my family, and even the way I speak English today. But for now, sit with this quiet question. Not loudly. Not urgently. Just honestly. Do you protect yourself by creating space? Or do you punish yourself by never allowing it? 2 weeks that changed me. 2 weeks does not sound like much time. It sounds too short to change a person, too brief to reshape habits, especially habits built over years of pressure, comparison, and quiet self-criticism. But sometimes life does not need long speeches. Sometimes it just rearranges the furniture, lowers the lights, and waits for you to notice what feels different. These 2 weeks in the United States did not begin with excitement. They began with discomfort. The kind that has no clear reason. I woke up early because my body was confused by the climate. Cool mornings. Dry air. Long stretches of quiet. The sky felt wider than my thoughts. People spoke politely, briefly, and then stopped. No one filled the silence for me. No one checked if I understood every word. At first, my mind panicked. When you learn English, silence feels dangerous. Silence feels like a test you are failing. You think you must respond quickly or you will look stupid. But here, no one rushed me. They waited. Or they simply moved on, trusting that I would catch up when ready. This was my first lesson, though I did not recognize it yet. In American daily life, especially outside big cities, time stretches. Conversations breathe. People protect their schedules the way they protect their personal space. This is not because they do not care. It is because they believe energy is limited. You spend it wisely or you burn out. Climate quietly trains this mindset. In places with long winters or sudden weather changes, people learn to conserve. They learn to pause. When the environment teaches you that tomorrow can be harsh, you stop wasting yourself today. This shapes culture more than any rulebook. During these 2 weeks, I paid attention to small moments. A neighbor waving from a distance, not coming closer. A cashier smiling but not chatting. A couple sitting together in silence at a cafe, both on their phones, not trying to entertain each other. At first, this looked lonely. Then it looked intentional. In psychology, there is a concept called self-regulation. It is the ability to manage your emotional energy without relying on others to stabilize you. American culture, shaped by independence and vast physical space, encourages this early. Children are taught to sleep alone, decide early, speak up when needed, and step back when overwhelmed. Space is not emptiness. Space is control. This hit me hard when I thought about my English learning journey. Back home, learning often meant constant correction. Someone was always talking, always advising, always comparing. Progress came with noise. Here, progress came with quiet. I noticed that when no one interrupted my thoughts, English sentences formed more naturally. Not perfect sentences. Honest ones. One afternoon, I tried to explain a simple feeling to someone. I stopped mid-sentence, searching for a word. No one jumped in to help. No one finished my sentence. They waited. My heart raced. Then, slowly, the word arrived. Tired. Just one word. But it was mine. Cognitive science explains this clearly. When learners are given wait time, the brain retrieves language more deeply. Interruptions may feel helpful, but they steal ownership. These 2 weeks gave me ownership back. Over my pace. Over my voice. Emotionally, something else shifted. I stopped apologizing for pauses. I stopped filling gaps with nervous smiles. I allowed moments to stay unfinished. This changed how I felt about myself. Not just as an English learner, but as a person navigating relationships. Because space is not only about language. It is about love. About marriage. About how close is too close. In these 2 weeks, I saw couples argue quietly, then separate physically to cool down. I saw parents allow children to sit alone bored, without rescuing them with screens or instructions. At first, this felt harsh. Then I understood. They were teaching emotional resilience. They were saying, without words, you can sit with yourself. You will survive this feeling. This philosophy challenged me deeply. I realized how often I tried to fix discomfort quickly, by talking more, explaining more, trying harder. But effort without space turns into pressure. Pressure kills curiosity. And curiosity is the heart of language learning. By the end of the 2nd week, something unexpected happened. I felt lighter. Not because my English improved dramatically, but because my relationship with learning changed. I no longer chased fluency. I allowed it to walk beside me. These 2 weeks did not make me fluent. They made me calmer. And calm is the foundation of everything else. If you are learning English and feeling stuck, maybe what you need is not another method. Maybe you need what Americans quietly protect every day: room to breathe, room to fail, room to grow without being watched. In the next part of this story, I will show you how climate itself, heat, cold, light, and darkness, shapes personality in America more than most people realize, and how understanding this can make English feel less foreign and more human. Climate shapes personality. If you want to understand Americans, do not start with their words. Start with their weather. Start with the way the air feels on your skin in the morning, the way the sky changes color without warning, the way seasons do not politely blend into each other but arrive like uninvited guests. Climate is not just background scenery in the United States. It is a quiet teacher, shaping how people think, speak, love, and protect themselves. During my 2 weeks here, I felt this lesson in my body before I understood it with my mind. One morning was bright and dry, the kind of air that wakes you up before coffee. The next day was cold, heavy, and gray, pressing against the windows like a mood. People adjusted without drama. They dressed differently. They moved differently. They spoke less. No one complained. They adapted. This constant adaptation builds a certain personality. When the environment is unpredictable, you learn not to rely too much on external comfort. You learn to create stability inside yourself. This is why many Americans value emotional space. Not because they are distant, but because their environment taught them early that comfort can disappear overnight. Psychologists call this environmental conditioning. Over time, the brain associates survival with flexibility and self-reliance. In regions with harsh winters, extreme heat, or sudden storms, people develop routines that protect energy. They plan ahead. They leave buffers. They do not overcommit emotionally or socially, because weather may force them to retreat. Think about what this means for communication. In a climate where silence often accompanies long winters or hot afternoons, quiet becomes normal. Talking less is not rude. It is practical. Words are saved for when they matter. As someone learning English, I initially misunderstood this. When conversations stayed short, I thought I failed. When people did not ask follow-up questions, I assumed they were uninterested. But the truth was simpler. They were conserving energy. Just like they conserve heat in winter and shade in summer. Language reflects this climate logic. American English favors clarity and efficiency. Short sentences. Direct meaning. Fewer emotional layers in everyday speech. Not because emotions are absent, but because conditions trained people to speak in ways that do not waste time or warmth. When the temperature drops, long conversations are expensive. Neuroscience offers an interesting parallel. The brain itself is an energy-saving organ. It prefers simple structures, predictable patterns, and minimal overload. When learners are overwhelmed by fast speech, long explanations, or emotional pressure, the brain shuts down unnecessary processing. Learning stops. This is why climate-shaped cultures often produce communication styles that are easier to process cognitively. Simple English is not poor English. It is survival English. It evolved to work under stress, under cold, under heat, under movement. I noticed this one afternoon when someone described the weather to me. They did not say, "It is somewhat chilly with a chance of emotional gloom." They said, "It's cold today." And that was enough. No extra words. No declaración. Just information. This simplicity extended into relationships. Climate teaches Americans to respect each other's internal weather. If someone is quiet, you do not push. If someone retreats, you give space. You assume they are managing their own storm. For learners of English, this is powerful. You do not need to fill every silence. You do not need perfect grammar to be understood. Often, one honest sentence is enough. Research in psycholinguistics shows that comprehension increases when language matches environmental context. In calm settings, slow and simple speech builds trust. In harsh settings, brevity builds safety. American English carries both, because American climate demands both. I realized that my anxiety around English came from trying to perform, not communicate. I wanted to sound smooth, fluent, impressive. But American communication, shaped by climate, does not reward performance. It rewards clarity. It rewards calm presence. Even accents are treated differently here. Because climates vary so much across states, people expect variation. Different ways of speaking signal different backgrounds, not lower intelligence. This tolerance is also climate-born. When geography is large, uniformity becomes unrealistic. This understanding changed how I practiced English. Instead of memorizing long dialogues, I focused on short, useful phrases connected to physical reality. It's hot. I need a break. Let's talk later. These sentences matched the environment. They felt natural. They stuck. Climate also affects emotional rhythms. In colder or darker months, people slow down emotionally. They need more personal space. In warmer seasons, they open up. This cycle teaches patience in relationships. Love does not stay intense all year. And that is normal. When learners expect constant enthusiasm, from themselves or others, they become disappointed. But if you see learning as seasonal, like climate, you stop blaming yourself for low-energy days. You rest. You wait. You continue later. Understanding climate helped me stop taking things personally. Short replies were not rejection. Silence was not judgment. Distance was not coldness. It was adaptation. If you are learning English through stories, remember this: language is born from environment. To understand the language, feel the weather behind it. Feel the space it protects. In the next part, I will talk about how this climate-shaped mindset becomes a cultural rule in America, personal boundaries, and why misunderstanding them can quietly break love, learning, and even motivation itself. Culture of personal boundaries. If climate teaches Americans how to survive, culture teaches them where to draw the line. Not a loud line. Not an angry one. A quiet, invisible line that says, "This is me, and that is you, and both matter." Personal boundaries in the United States are not a trend. They are a habit learned early, practiced daily, and defended without apology. At first, this culture feels confusing, especially if you come from a place where closeness means care. You expect people to ask more questions, to check in often, to explain themselves. Instead, you meet polite distance. People do not touch much. They do not read your mind. They do not step in unless invited. This can feel cold. It can feel like rejection. But it is neither. Boundaries in American culture are a form of respect. They say, I trust you to manage your inner world, and I expect the same trust in return. This expectation shows up everywhere. In conversations, relationships, workplaces, even friendships. In daily speech, this means people often keep things short. They do not overshare by default. Silence is not awkward, it is neutral. Interrupting is avoided. Finishing someone else's sentence, even to help, can feel intrusive. For someone learning English, this is both a challenge and a gift. The challenge is obvious. You might feel unsupported. You might wish someone would correct you more, guide you more, push you more. But the gift is subtle and powerful. You are given ownership of your pace, of your mistakes, of your growth. Psychology explains this through boundary theory. Clear boundaries reduce emotional overload and increase self-efficacy. The belief that you can handle things on your own. When people step back instead of stepping in, they send a quiet message, you are capable. This message changed how I saw my struggles with English. In other cultures, help comes quickly, sometimes too quickly. Corrections arrive before you finish thinking. Advice arrives before you ask. Here, help waits at the door until invited. At first, I felt abandoned. Then I felt challenged. And finally, I felt empowered. One moment stands out. I was trying to explain a personal feeling in English. Nothing dramatic, just tiredness mixed with frustration. I stopped, searching for words. The person listening did not rescue me. They did not correct my grammar. They simply waited, calmly, eyes steady. In that space, my brain worked harder, deeper. I found my own words. They were imperfect, but they were mine. This is how boundaries teach growth. They create space for effort without pressure. Neuroscience shows that autonomy increases motivation and memory retention. When learners feel in control, dopamine, the brain's learning chemical, flows more naturally. Forced help interrupts this process. Boundaries also protect emotional safety. In American relationships, it is common to ask before entering sensitive topics. Is this a good time? Can I share something? These questions are not formalities. They are gatekeepers. They prevent emotional flooding. This matters deeply in love and marriage. Without boundaries, closeness turns into suffocation. With boundaries, distance turns into trust. I noticed couples here often give each other space after tension. Not as punishment, but as regulation. They understand that strong emotions need room to settle. Coming back calm is better than staying close and saying things you cannot take back. For someone new to this culture, especially from a background where love means constant presence, this can feel scary. Silence feels like danger. Distance feels like loss. But over time, you see the pattern. Space does not end connection. It preserves it. Language learning follows the same rule. When you force yourself to speak perfectly, you tense up. When you allow pauses, your thoughts breathe. Boundaries between effort and rest make learning sustainable. American English reflects this boundary culture. Phrases like "I need some time," "let's talk later," or "I'm not ready yet" are not excuses. They are accepted signals. You do not owe explanations beyond your limit. This was difficult for me to accept. I was used to explaining myself fully, justifying pauses, apologizing for silence. Here, none of that was required. A simple sentence was enough. Understanding this changed my listening skills too. I stopped overinterpreting tone. I stopped assuming hidden meanings. I listened to words as they were, not as emotional puzzles. Boundaries simplify communication. They reduce guessing. They lower anxiety. This is especially helpful when learning a second language. Less guessing means more clarity. More clarity means more confidence. Of course, boundaries can be misused. Too much distance becomes avoidance. Too much silence becomes neglect. But American culture generally encourages balance. Step back when overwhelmed. Step in when ready. Once I understood this, my frustration softened. I stopped expecting others to manage my feelings. I started managing them myself. This shift was uncomfortable, but freeing. If you are learning English through real stories, remember this lesson. You do not need constant correction. You need respectful space. You do not need pressure. You need permission. In the next part of this story, I will show how misunderstanding these boundaries nearly broke a love story, and how learning to respect space changed everything. When love feels distant. There is a moment in every relationship when silence changes its meaning. At first, silence feels peaceful. Then one day, without warning, it feels heavy. You sit next to someone you love, and instead of comfort, you feel a quiet pressure building in your chest. Nothing is said, yet everything feels wrong. This is where my story began to bend. During those 2 weeks in the United States, love did not look the way I expected it to look. I thought love meant constant checking, constant sharing, constant emotional closeness. Instead, I saw couples living side by side, sometimes barely speaking for hours. They were not fighting. They were not unhappy. They were simply apart together. At first, this terrified me. In my own relationship, silence triggered old fears. When words disappeared, my mind rushed to fill the gap. Did I say something wrong? Are they pulling away? Is love fading? These thoughts were loud, fast, and exhausting. And the more anxious I became, the more I wanted to talk, to explain, to fix, to close the distance immediately. But here is the painful truth I learned. When one person chases closeness and the other needs space, love starts to feel like a misunderstanding instead of a connection. In American culture, especially among adults, emotional distance is often a form of self-regulation, not rejection. People step back to calm their nervous system. They retreat to think, to feel, to process. This is not punishment. It is protection. Psychology calls this attachment regulation. When emotions rise too high, healthy adults create space to prevent emotional flooding. Without this space, conversations turn reactive. Words become weapons. Silence, used well, becomes a shield. I did not know this then. I interpreted space as danger. One evening, after a small disagreement, the other person became quiet. No argument. No explanation. Just distance. My heart raced. My English failed me. I wanted to speak, but every sentence felt wrong. Too emotional. Too long. Too desperate. So I stayed silent too, but not calmly. My silence was loud inside. This is where many language learners suffer twice. First, from emotional confusion. Second, from linguistic limitation. You want to express complex feelings, but your vocabulary feels small. You fear being misunderstood, so you say nothing. And silence, without understanding, becomes a wall. What I later realized is this: silence itself is not the enemy. Misreading silence is. In American relationships, silence often means, I need time. Not, I don't care. Distance often means, I'm protecting us. Not, I'm leaving. But if you come from a culture where closeness equals safety, this logic feels upside down. Neuroscience helps explain why this clash hurts so much. When we sense emotional distance, the brain's threat system activates. Cortisol rises. Logical thinking drops. Language access becomes harder. This is why, in moments of relationship stress, your English feels worse. It is not because you forgot the language. It is because your brain is in survival mode. That night, I could not sleep. I replayed conversations. I rehearsed English sentences that sounded perfect in my head but never came out of my mouth. My body was tense. My chest felt tight. Love felt far away. The next day, something unexpected happened. Nothing dramatic. Just a simple sentence from the other person. I needed space last night. I'm okay now. No epalegi. No long explanation. Just clarity. That sentence changed everything. I realized how much energy I had wasted filling silence with fear. I realized that my idea of love was crowded. Too many words, too much urgency, too little trust. American love, shaped by boundaries, asks for something different. It asks you to sit with discomfort without immediately fixing it. This does not mean ignoring problems. It means choosing the right moment to face them. For English learners, this is a powerful lesson. You do not need to explain your emotions perfectly in the heat of the moment. You can say simple things. I need time. I'm not ready to talk. Let's talk later. These sentences are not weak. They are emotionally intelligent. Studies on relationship communication show that couples who pause before discussing conflict have better outcomes. The pause lowers emotional intensity and improves clarity. Space improves understanding. When I accepted this, love stopped feeling like a test. I stopped chasing reassurance. I started trusting quiet. Ironically, this made closeness return naturally. Conversations became softer. Words felt safer. My English improved not because I studied more, but because I felt less pressure to perform. Love, like language, grows best when it is not forced. If you are learning English through real stories, remember this part carefully. When love feels distant, it does not always mean something is wrong. Sometimes it means space is doing its job. In the next part of this story, I will share how these misunderstandings grew even deeper inside marriage, and how cultural differences around space can quietly turn love into tension if you do not understand them. Marriage under pressure. Marriage is where habits stop being personal and start becoming shared weather. Every small preference turns into a daily pattern. Every misunderstanding repeats itself until it either softens or hardens. In the United States, I learned that marriage does not collapse from big fights as often as it strains under constant closeness without air. During those 2 weeks, I watched married couples move through ordinary days. Morning routines were quiet. Evenings were calm. There was affection, but it was not loud. There was care, but it was not invasive. At first, this looked distant. Then I noticed something else. These couples argued less in public, raised their voices less at home, and seemed to recover faster after tension. The secret was not love language. It was space management. In many cultures, marriage is built on togetherness. Doing everything together. Sharing every thought. Solving problems immediately. This feels loving, but it can quietly create pressure. When two nervous systems stay constantly connected, stress multiplies instead of dissolving. American marriage culture, shaped by boundaries, approaches this differently. Partners are encouraged to maintain individuality. Separate hobbies. Separate emotional processing. Separate time. Not to escape the marriage, but to protect it. Psychologists call this differentiation. It is the ability to stay emotionally connected while remaining psychologically separate. High differentiation allows couples to face stress without losing themselves or attacking each other. I did not understand this at first. In moments of tension, I wanted to talk immediately. To explain. To fix. Silence felt like danger. Space felt like abandonment. So I pushed closer, emotionally and verbally. The result was the opposite of what I wanted. The more I pressed for connection, the more pressure filled the room. Conversations became heavier. Words lost clarity. My English suffered. Not because my skills dropped, but because my emotional load was too high. Neuroscience explains this clearly. Under emotional stress, the prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for language, logic, and empathy, loses access. The brain shifts to fight or flight. In this state, even your native language becomes harder to use. A second language becomes fragile. This is why marriage pressure affects language learning more than we admit. When emotional safety drops, learning capacity collapses. One evening, after a tense exchange, I noticed something different. Instead of continuing the discussion, the other person said calmly, "I need some time. Let's talk later." Then they physically left the room. Every instinct in me resisted this. My body wanted closure. My mind wanted reassurance. But I did nothing. I stayed where I was. That hour felt long. My thoughts raced. But slowly, something changed. My breathing slowed. My shoulders dropped. The urgency faded. When we spoke again later, the conversation was shorter, but clearer. No acquiescence. No emotional flooding. Just facts and feelings, expressed simply. This was my turning point. I realized that space was not the absence of commitment. It was a tool for preserving it. American marriages do not rely on constant emotional closeness. They rely on emotional regulation. Research supports this. Studies show that couples who take timeouts during conflict report higher satisfaction and lower divorce rates. Distance, used intentionally, prevents damage. This idea also transformed how I practiced English within marriage. I stopped forcing long explanations during emotional moments. I used simple sentences. I'm overwhelmed. I need a break. We can talk later. These phrases respected both the language and the relationship. Marriage under pressure exposes every weakness: communication habits, emotional triggers, cultural expectations. Without boundaries, pressure builds until something cracks. With boundaries, pressure releases before damage occurs. I also noticed how Americans separate problem-solving from emotional processing. They do not expect their partner to fix their feelings immediately. They regulate themselves first. Then they return to the conversation. This is difficult for learners of English, especially those who rely heavily on emotional connection to feel safe. But it is also empowering. You are not required to be fluent in emotions on demand. You are allowed to pause. Marriage taught me that silence can be responsible. Distance can be loving. And not every feeling needs immediate translation into words. Once I accepted this, tension decreased. My English felt more stable. My voice felt steadier. Not because I learned more vocabulary, but because I stopped speaking from panic. Marriage in the US is not perfect. It carries its own challenges. But it offers one valuable lesson: love survives better when it is given room to breathe. If you are learning English while navigating marriage or long-term relationships, remember this. You do not have to solve everything at once. You do not have to speak perfectly when emotions are high. Sometimes, the most intelligent thing you can say is nothing. Yet, in the next part of this story, I will step inside American family life and parenting, where this respect for space begins early, and where children learn emotional independence long before they learn complex words. Family, kids, and silence. If marriage teaches adults how to manage space, family life in the United States teaches it from the very beginning. Children here grow up learning something that feels uncomfortable to many outsiders. Silence is not always a problem that adults must fix. Sometimes, silence is a classroom. During those 2 weeks, I spent time around American families, ordinary homes, ordinary evenings, nothing staged. What surprised me was not what parents did, but what they did not do. They did not rush to entertain their children. They did not explain every feeling. They did not panic when a child sat alone, bored, quiet, or even a little frustrated. At first, this looked careless. Then I noticed the result. Children were calm. Not constantly happy, but regulated. They knew how to sit with themselves. In many cultures, family closeness means constant interaction. Adults talk for children. Adults decide for children. Adults step in quickly to prevent discomfort. The intention is love. The effect, often unnoticed, is emotional dependence. Children learn that discomfort must be removed immediately, by someone else. American parenting, shaped by boundaries and climate, sends a different message: you can handle this moment. This message starts early. Children are encouraged to sleep alone. They are given quiet time. They are allowed to feel bored without rescue. This builds emotional tolerance, the ability to stay calm when nothing is happening. Psychologists call this self-soothing. It is the foundation of emotional resilience. When children learn to self-soothe, they grow into adults who do not panic at silence, distance, or uncertainty. This matters deeply for language learning. If you cannot tolerate silence, you rush to fill it. If you rush, you stop listening. If you stop listening, language becomes noise instead of meaning. I noticed this in myself. When English conversations paused, my instinct was to panic. To speak too fast. To say something, anything. But American family culture trains people to wait. To let silence work. One afternoon, I watched a child struggle with a simple task. The parent stood nearby but said nothing. No instructions. No encouragement. Just presence. The child failed once, tried again, and succeeded. Pride followed. Not applause. Pride. This scene stayed with me. Neuroscience explains why this works. When someone steps in too early, the brain does not complete the learning loop. When someone waits, the brain experiences effort, failure, adjustment, and success. This loop strengthens memory and confidence. Language learning follows the same loop. If someone corrects you too quickly, you learn dependency. If someone waits, you learn retrieval. Retrieval strengthens language far more than repetition. American families unintentionally support this by respecting silence. Children learn that not being understood immediately is normal. They learn to try again. They learn patience. This also shapes family conversations. Children are taught to speak when ready, not when demanded. Parents listen without interrupting. Conversations may be short, but they are direct. No emotional guessing games. For English learners, this environment can feel intimidating. No one rescues you. No one finishes your sentence. But this is not cruelty. It is trust. I realized something uncomfortable. I was expecting others to regulate my emotions the way some cultures do within families. I wanted reassurance, correction, emotional closeness on demand. But American family culture prepares people to regulate themselves first. This explains why adults here are often comfortable being alone. Why they do not need constant conversation. Why they protect their personal time fiercely. It starts in childhood. Family silence also teaches boundaries between roles. Parents are not emotional dumping grounds for children. Children are not emotional caretakers for parents. Each person is responsible for their own feelings. This separation reduces emotional burden. It also reduces guilt. You are not expected to fix everyone. For someone learning English, especially through emotional stories, this is a relief. You do not need to perform emotionally to belong. You just need to be present. I began applying this lesson to my own practice. I allowed quiet moments while listening to English. I stopped replaying sentences in my head anxiously. I let words arrive slowly. I also changed how I listened to others. I stopped interrupting. I stopped searching for perfect responses. I let silence sit between us. Communication felt lighter. Family life in the US is not perfect. Children struggle. Parents worry. But the system quietly builds something powerful: tolerance for space. And tolerance for space is tolerance for learning. If you grew up in a culture where silence felt unsafe, this adjustment is hard. But it is also healing. Silence does not mean abandonment. It means trust. In the next part of this story, I will explain how this early training leads adults to protect themselves emotionally, and why Americans are not selfish when they do this, but strategic. Protecting yourself emotionally. At some point, silence stops being something you endure and becomes something you choose. This is where American culture often gets misunderstood. When people hear step back, cancel plans, or say very little, outsiders sometimes label it as cold, selfish, or emotionally unavailable. But what I learned during these weeks is simpler and more uncomfortable. Americans are not avoiding connection. They are protecting their nervous system. Emotional self-protection in the US is not dramatic. There are no long explanations. No emotional speeches. Just short decisions made early, before damage happens. I need space. I'm overwhelmed. Let's talk later. These sentences are not walls. They are seatbelts. Psychology explains this through emotional regulation. When stress rises, healthy adults reduce stimulation. They lower emotional input. They retreat just enough to regain balance. This prevents emotional flooding, the state where feelings become so intense that logic and empathy shut down. Many cultures treat emotional flooding as proof of care. The louder the emotion, the deeper the love. American culture does the opposite. It treats emotional control as respect. You regulate yourself so you do not spill chaos onto others. This idea was hard for me to accept. I was used to processing emotions together, immediately, intensely. If something hurt, I wanted to talk it out right away. Silence felt like neglect. Distance felt like rejection. But over time, I noticed something important. When Americans protect themselves early, conflicts stay smaller. Emotions cool faster. Words hurt less. Relationships recover sooner. Neuroscience supports this. When the amygdala, the brain's alarm system, is triggered, it hijacks language centers. You lose access to nuance. You speak in extremes. If you pause and reduce stimulation, the prefrontal cortex comes back online. You regain language, perspective, and empathy. This is why Americans often step away when emotions rise. They are not running. They are resetting. For English learners, this matters more than we realize. When you feel emotionally unsafe, your English disappears. You know the words, but they hide. This is not a language problem. It is a nervous system problem. I noticed that on days when I felt emotionally protected, when I allowed myself quiet, rest, and distance, my English felt clearer. I listened better. I spoke slower. Words came naturally. On days when I pushed myself emotionally, English felt heavy and forced. Protecting yourself emotionally is not selfish. It is strategic. It preserves energy for what matters. American culture encourages this strategy openly. Therapy language is common. People talk about boundaries, burnout, and mental health without shame. This normalizes self-protection. You are not weak for stepping back. You are responsible. This approach also explains why Americans do not overshare easily. Sharing emotions is a choice, not a default. You earn access to someone's inner world over time. This keeps emotional labor balanced. For someone learning English through emotional storytelling, this can feel frustrating. You want depth. You want connection. But American culture asks for pacing. Emotional pacing, like language pacing, prevents overload. I began practicing this consciously. When I felt overwhelmed, I stopped pushing myself to speak perfectly. I allowed simple language. I'm tired. I need a break. Not now. These phrases protected both my emotions and my English. Research on second language acquisition shows that emotional safety increases fluency more than repetition. When learners feel safe, mistakes decrease naturally. When learners feel threatened, mistakes increase. Protecting yourself emotionally creates that safety. This also changed how I interpreted others. When someone was quiet, I stopped assuming rejection. When plans changed, I stopped personalizing it. I saw these actions as regulation, not withdrawal. The result was surprising. I felt closer to people, not farther. Because I stopped chasing reassurance. I respected their space, and mine. Americans are often described as distant. But what they really value is emotional sustainability. They build lives that do not require constant emotional output. This leaves room for stability, long-term relationships, and consistent learning. If you want to learn English in a way that lasts, this mindset matters. You cannot flood yourself with content, pressure, and self-criticism. You must protect your emotional energy the way Americans do. This does not mean avoiding discomfort. It means choosing it wisely. Silence is not weakness. Distance is not failure. They are tools. In the next part of this story, I will show how learning English through everyday life, through small, real moments, became easier once I stopped forcing progress and started protecting myself. Learning English through life. There was a moment when I stopped asking, "How can I improve my English faster?" and started asking a quieter question, "How do I live in English without hurting myself?" That question changed everything. Because once you protect your emotional space, learning stops being a battle and becomes a byproduct of living. In the United States, English is not performed most of the time. It is used. Briefly. Casually. Imperfectly. People speak to solve small problems, not to impress. This sounds obvious, but for learners, it is revolutionary. We are often trained to study English as a subject, not as a life tool. Grammar before meaning. Accuracy before comfort. Speed before understanding. Living here forced me to reverse that order. I learned English in fragments. At the grocery store. At the gas station. In quiet kitchens and parking lots. Real life does not give you full sentences. It gives you moments. And those moments are slow enough, if you allow them to be. One morning, someone asked me a simple question, "Busy today?" That was it. No follow-up. No pressure. I answered, "A little." 2 words. Enough. The conversation ended naturally. No one waited for more. No one judged my grammar. That exchange stayed with me longer than any textbook dialogue. Psycholinguistics explains why. Language sticks when it is connected to emotion and context. A sentence learned under stress fades quickly. A sentence learned in calm, everyday life anchors itself in memory. Your brain remembers how it felt, not just what was said. This is why Americans' learning styles appear relaxed. They repeat small phrases in real contexts. They do not rehearse speeches for daily life. They trust exposure over performance. Once I noticed this, I changed how I practiced. I stopped forcing myself to speak in long paragraphs. I focused on one sentence per situation. One honest sentence. "It's cold today. I need a break. Let's talk later." These sentences followed me everywhere. They fit American life. They respected boundaries. They required no emotional overexertion. Slow learning is not lazy learning. Neuroscience shows that spaced repetition, short exposure over time, creates stronger neural pathways than intense cramming. The brain needs rest to consolidate memory. This is why Americans protect personal time. They are unconsciously supporting long-term learning. I also noticed how Americans listen. They do not strain to decode every word. They listen for meaning. If something is unclear, they ask directly or let it go. This reduces anxiety on both sides. As a learner, I adopted this habit. I stopped panicking when I missed a word. I stayed present. Meaning often arrived later, through context. This reduced mental fatigue dramatically. There is also something important about accent. In the US, accents are normal. Regional accents. Immigrant accents. No one expects uniformity. This reduces pressure. You are allowed to sound like yourself. When emotional safety increases, language flows. I practiced English while walking, cooking, doing nothing special. I spoke to myself quietly. Not to practice, but to narrate life. "I'm tired. This feels heavy. I'll do it later." These sentences were not exercises. They were self-talk. And they mattered. Research on internal speech shows that self-directed language strengthens fluency. When you speak without an audience, your nervous system stays calm. Calm accelerates learning. This approach also changed my reading and listening. I chose stories, not lessons. Real voices. Slow pacing. Emotional relevance. I stopped chasing advanced vocabulary. I chased understanding. Americans consume language the same way. Podcasts while driving. Short news clips. Conversations while doing other things. Language is integrated, not isolated. Once English became part of my life rhythm, motivation returned naturally. Not excitement. Motivation. Quiet, sustainable motivation. I realized something crucial. The reason many people quit learning English is not difficulty. It is emotional exhaustion. They overload themselves. They demand progress without protection. American life, with all its flaws, models a different way. Protect your space. Use language when needed. Rest when overwhelmed. Continue tomorrow. This is why learning English through life works. It removes the stage. There is no audience. No performance anxiety. Just communication. If you are struggling, consider this shift. Stop asking how to study more. Ask how to live more gently with the language. In the next part of this story, I will show how small, almost invisible actions, tiny changes in behavior, healed not only my English, but my relationships and motivation as well. Small actions that heal. Big change rarely arrives with noise. It slips in quietly, disguised as something too small to matter. In the United States, I learned that healing, whether in language, love, or motivation, often begins with actions so subtle you almost dismiss them. Almost. One small action was this. I stopped correcting myself mid-sentence. Every time I interrupted my own speech to fix grammar, my nervous system spiked. My voice tightened. Meaning collapsed. So I made a rule. Finish the thought first. Correct later, or not at all. This single change made my English sound calmer immediately. Not better. Calmer. And calm is persuasive. Another small action was timing. I chose when to speak, not just what to say. If emotions were high, I delayed. If my body felt tight, I waited. Americans do this instinctively. They separate emotional processing from communication. This protects relationships from unnecessary damage. Psychology supports this through state-dependent learning. The brain retrieves language best when emotional state during use matches emotional state during learning. If you practice English calmly but speak it under stress, access drops. So I practiced calm speaking, slow, gentle, unfinished, and my real conversations improved. I also shortened my sentences on purpose. This felt wrong at first. Like I was lowering my level. But short sentences are not simple-minded. They are efficient. They respect attention. American English rewards this. I need time. This feels heavy. Let's pause. These phrases did more healing than long explanations ever did. They reduced misunderstanding. They protected energy. They kept conversations open instead of explosive. Another small action was physical space. I stepped back when talking. Literally. I stood a little farther away. I noticed how this changed my tone. My voice softened. My breathing slowed. Americans often manage emotions through physical distance before verbal clarity appears. Neuroscience explains this link between body and language. When physical space increases, the nervous system calms. When the nervous system calms, language access improves. Your body learns before your mind does. I also reduced input. Fewer videos. Shorter listening sessions. One story instead of 10 clips. Overconsumption creates anxiety disguised as motivation. American culture, with its emphasis on personal time, normalizes stopping before overload. This helped my reading too. I read less but deeper. I stopped translating every word. I read for sense, not accuracy. Comprehension rose naturally. Another healing action was permission. I gave myself permission to be boring. Not every conversation needs personality. Not every sentence needs emotion. Functional language is enough most days. Americans live comfortably inside this truth. I watched how they ended conversations without drama. Gotta run. Talk later. No guilt. No over-explaining. I copied this. My mental load dropped instantly. There was also a shift in how I handled mistakes. I stopped replaying them. Rumination is a habit, not a requirement. Americans move on quickly. This is not denial. It is efficiency. Mistakes are information, not identity. Cognitive behavioral psychology shows that reducing rumination lowers anxiety and improves performance. By letting mistakes pass, your brain stays flexible. Flexibility improves learning. I applied this to relationships as well. Instead of fixing every misunderstanding immediately, I noted it and returned later. Tension softened. Language clarified. Trust grew. Small actions compound. Even motivation healed through small choices. I stopped setting big goals. I set gentle ones. 10 minutes. 1 page. 1 conversation. Consistency replaced intensity. This mirrors how Americans approach fitness, work, and learning. Sustainable effort beats heroic bursts. The nervous system prefers predictability. One evening, I noticed something subtle. English no longer felt like a task. It felt like background music. Present, but not demanding attention. This is the sign of integration. Integration happens when effort drops below resistance. When actions fit life instead of fighting it. If you are struggling, do not look for a new method. Look for friction. Where are you forcing? Where are you rushing? Remove one pressure point. Just one. Speak one sentence without correction. Pause one conversation instead of pushing. Listen without chasing every word. Protect 10 minutes of quiet. These actions heal because they respect how humans actually function. In the next part of this story, I will share the turning point. The moment when understanding space transformed confusion into connection, and why that shift made love, language and life feel lighter at the same time. A happier turning point. The turning point did not arrive as a dramatic realization. There was no argument, no breakdown, no sudden clarity. It arrived quietly, through understanding. And that made all the difference. I remember the exact moment. I was sitting alone in a public library in the United States, surrounded by people who were not talking to each other. Couples sat at separate tables. Friends studied without whispering. Parents and children shared space without constant interaction. At first, this had always looked cold to me. That day, it felt peaceful. For the first time, I understood that space was not absence. It was presence without pressure. This realization restructured everything I thought I knew about connection. In my previous mindset, closeness meant engagement. Silence meant withdrawal. Distance meant danger. But here, I was seeing a different model, one where closeness could exist without constant affirmation. This shift immediately changed how I interpreted behavior. When someone did not respond quickly, I no longer assumed rejection. When conversations ended abruptly, I did not read disrespect. When emotions cooled, I did not panic. I waited. And in that waiting, clarity appeared. Psychologically, this was a move from anxious attachment toward secure attachment. Secure attachment does not chase reassurance. It trusts continuity. American culture, intentionally or not, trains people into this pattern through strong personal boundaries. Once I recognized this, my emotional reactions softened. I stopped overreading signals. I stopped filling silence with assumptions. The result was relief. Mental, emotional, and physical. This understanding transformed my relationships first. Communication became cleaner. I spoke less but said more. I asked direct questions instead of hinting. I accepted not now, without translating it into never. People responded differently to me after this shift. Conversations felt lighter. Tension dissolved faster. Trust increased, not because I tried harder, but because I stopped forcing closeness. Then something unexpected happened. My English improved noticeably, without extra study. This made sense in hindsight. Anxiety had been the biggest barrier to language fluency. Once emotional pressure dropped, cognitive access improved. Words surfaced naturally. Sentences flowed without rehearsal. Silence no longer felt like failure. Linguistics research supports this. High emotional load reduces working memory capacity. Lower emotional load restores linguistic flexibility. In simple terms, calm people speak better. I noticed this especially in spontaneous conversation. Previously, I would prepare sentences mentally before speaking. Now, I allowed them to form as I talked. This felt risky at first. It became liberating. The turning point also changed how I viewed motivation. I stopped pushing myself to improve. I focused on staying consistent. Instead of asking, "How fast am I progressing?" I asked, "Is this sustainable?" American culture emphasizes sustainability over intensity. That principle applied beautifully to learning and life. I also became more patient with others. When someone needed space, I gave it without resentment. When someone withdrew temporarily, I did not pursue. Ironically, this often brought them back sooner. This is a paradox many people miss. Space invites return, pressure invites escape. Family dynamics shifted as well. I observed American parents allowing children emotional autonomy. They were available, but not intrusive. This balance created confidence rather than dependency. I began to understand that love does not require constant presence. It requires reliability. Reliability is quiet. It does not announce itself. It simply exists. As I adopted this mindset, my inner dialogue changed. I no longer criticized myself for pauses, mistakes, or uncertainty. I accepted them as part of the process. Self-trust replaced self-monitoring. This internal shift had an external impact. My voice slowed. My tone softened. My posture relaxed. People listened more closely, not because I spoke better English, but because I spoke from a regulated state. The happiest part of this turning point was the disappearance of urgency. I no longer felt behind. I no longer felt I had to catch up. Time stopped being an enemy. American life, despite its speed, respects personal pacing. Once I aligned with that rhythm, resistance faded. This was not about becoming American. It was about understanding a principle. Healthy systems allow space. They do not collapse without constant input. Language is a system. Relationships are systems. Motivation is a system. When you stop overloading them, they function naturally. That day in the library, nothing outward changed. But internally, a foundation settled. From that point forward, confusion gave way to coherence. Effort gave way to flow. I did not become more confident overnight. I became more grounded. And grounded people do not need to perform connection. They allow it. In the final part of this story, I will explain why understanding space is not optional in modern life, and how it protects love, learning, and mental health in ways most people never consider. Why space saves love. For a long time, I believed that love survived on closeness alone. The more we talked, the more we shared, the more we stayed connected, the safer love would be. Distance felt like risk. Silence felt like erosion. Space felt like the beginning of the end. I was wrong. Space did not weaken love. It revealed whether love was real. This realization came slowly, after everything else had settled, after the misunderstandings, the emotional fatigue, the pressure to explain myself in another language, another culture. Only then could I see the full picture. Love that cannot survive space is not fragile, it is dependent. In American culture, space is not treated as a threat. It is treated as maintenance. People step back not to disappear, but to reset. They protect individuality so connection remains voluntary, not forced. This principle is grounded in psychology. Healthy attachment requires differentiation, the ability to remain oneself while staying emotionally connected. Without differentiation, relationships collapse under emotional weight. Space provides that separation. Once I understood this, love felt lighter. I stopped checking for reassurance. I stopped measuring attention. I stopped equating availability with care. I trusted continuity instead of chasing confirmation. This trust changed how I loved others, and how I loved myself. I noticed how Americans schedule personal time without apology. They say, "I need a day," and no one interprets it as rejection. This normalizes emotional regulation. It prevents burnout before it begins. In contrast, many cultures treat constant engagement as proof of loyalty. But constant engagement drains emotional reserves. Space restores them. When I applied this understanding, conflicts de-escalated faster. Silence no longer felt hostile. It became neutral, even kind. Conversations resumed with clarity instead of resentment. Language learning followed the same pattern. I no longer pushed through fatigue. I stopped forcing output. I allowed language to rest. And when it returned, it was clearer. Neurologically, this makes sense. The brain consolidates learning during rest. Continuous effort without pause impairs retention. Space is not wasted time. It is integration time. Motivation, too, stabilized. I stopped relying on emotional highs. I built routines that allowed absence without guilt. Missing a day no longer meant failure. It meant balance. Modern life demands this skill more than ever. With constant notifications, instant replies, and perpetual availability, boundaries are no longer optional. They are protective. Space is not about withdrawal. It is about regulation. I also learned that giving space is an act of respect. It acknowledges the other person's inner world as separate from mine. It removes the burden of performance. It allows authenticity. This transformed my expectations in relationships. I stopped expecting people to fill my emotional gaps. I took responsibility for my own regulation. This made connection cleaner and more mutual. Love became a choice, not a dependency. Even family relationships improved. When I allowed distance without guilt, presence became more meaningful. Time together felt intentional rather than obligatory. Space clarified value. The most important lesson was internal. I learned to give myself space, space to not know, to not speak, to not progress visibly. I stopped treating silence as a problem to fix. In that silence, I heard myself more clearly. This is why space saves love. It prevents erosion by overuse. It preserves desire by removing obligation. It protects identity so connection remains honest. The same is true for learning English, building motivation, and navigating a new culture. When you allow space, systems self-correct. Pressure disappears. Growth resumes. If you are watching this and feeling tired, tired of trying, tired of explaining, tired of holding everything together, consider this: you may not need more effort. You may need more space. Space to breathe. Space to pause. Space to trust that what is real will remain. This story was not about America alone. It was about a universal principle revealed through a different culture. One that many of us were never taught. Space is not emptiness. It is structure. When you understand that, love stops feeling fragile. Language stops feeling heavy. Life stops feeling urgent. Thank you for staying until the end of this story. If it resonated with you, take a moment of space right now. Let the words settle. Then when you're ready, return. Calmer, clearer, and more grounded than before. Maybe after watching this story, you will no longer see silence, distance, or personal space the same way again. Maybe you will realize that what has been exhausting you all this time is not your English level, not your relationship, and not your effort, but the fact that you have been trying to stay too close, too available, too strong in a world that actually needs room to breathe. In the United States, people do not step back because they stop caring. They step back because they are protecting themselves. And sometimes, without realizing it, they are also protecting their love, their marriage, their family, and the last bit of emotional energy they have left. When you understand this, you do not just understand American culture, you understand yourself more clearly. If you are learning English and feeling stuck, if you are in a relationship where you constantly feel the need to explain, prove, or hold everything together, or if you are living in the US and quietly feeling lost inside, this video was not made to teach you more vocabulary. It was made to help you slow down, listen deeply, and learn English through real life stories, just like the one you just experienced. And this is only one small story among many real stories about life, love, marriage, family, children, climate, culture, and emotional survival in America. told in slow, clear, real English so you can practice listening, reading, and speaking while also healing something inside yourself. If this story made you feel understood, and if you want to keep learning English without pressure, without textbooks, and without feeling stupid or rushed, then subscribe to this channel now. The next videos will help you not only speak better English, but also live more calmly and confidently in a world that often moves too fast. Do not learn English to chase approval. Learn it to protect yourself. That's all for now. I'll be making more videos like this in the future. Please subscribe to the channel and like the video so the YouTube algorithm knows this channel is for you.